One night, I packed up the last of my life in a U-Haul and headed south. At 27, I'd burned out in the city and figured a change of pace and scenery was exactly what I needed. I landed a night shift job at Manchac Port, right outside of New Orleans. The port sat practically on the edge of the Manchac Swamp, a place I'd only ever heard described in hushed tones. I found a small, single-story house a few miles from the port. It was cheap, slightly raised on blocks against the inevitable flood, and backed up right against the thick black line of cypress and moss that was the swamp. When I first moved in, the air was so heavy and humid it felt like breathing soup, and the silence at night was profound, broken only by the buzzing of insects and the occasional croaking of a giant bullfrog. The job was stacking crates, logging inventory, and generally babysitting $1 million of cargo. It was monotonous and lonely, until I met Larry. Larry was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, lean, perpetually smelling faintly of tobacco and swamp water, and the only other person crazy enough to take the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift with me in my section. He was quiet but friendly. A few weeks in, sitting on a couple of overturned oil drums during our break, I cracked a joke about the spooky atmosphere. Larry didn't laugh. "You won't be laughing long, Mikey," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "You're working on the edge of the Manchac now. That swamp. It ain't just water and trees." Larry gave me the first real warning. He spoke about the swamp folk, a mix of shadow people, restless spirits, and the truly dangerous, vengeful voodoo priests whose rituals and sacrifices had cursed this land for generations. He told me about the bad things that had happened deep in the muck. Voodoo rituals for power, offerings to dark spirits, and the kind of violence that lingers long after the blood is gone. He'd only ever look at the ground when he talked about it, like saying the words out loud was an invitation. Not long after that talk, the paranormal experiences started. I was sitting in my backyard one warm, pitch-black night, trying to decompress after work. That's when I heard it. A low, clear whistle coming from the edge of the swamp line. It wasn't the wind. It sounded almost human, but too musical, too inviting. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Another time I heard children laughing, a chorus of tiny, joyful sounds that felt horribly out of place. Manchac is no place for kids, and the sounds seemed to swirl just beyond my sight, fading into the moss and muck. I'd also hear weeping, a faint, mournful sound like a woman crying into her hands, always coming from the deep cover of the trees. The lights were the worst. Weird light orbs, sometimes blue, sometimes a sickly green, would float right above the swamp water like eerie lanterns. They weren't fireflies, and they didn't move like anything natural. They were just there, watching. At work, the port felt like a stage for an audience I couldn't see. I'd be alone in the inventory section, and I'd clearly hear voices, muffled and indistinct, whispering my name or speaking in some strange guttural language. Then came the random footsteps, heavy boots on the concrete that would stop just behind me. I'd whirl around, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, but there was never anyone there. That's when I started seeing him. The Hat Man. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow taller and darker than any man, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned brimmed hat. He wasn't solid, just a void that moved, and every time I turned to face him, he'd be gone. I told Larry about it. Everything. The whistles, the laughs, the Hat Man. He'd just grunt, stare out at the swamp, and mutter something like, "Didn't I tell ya, Mikey?" Leave well enough alone. He never wanted to talk about it, and his silence was more unnerving than anything I'd seen. The tension was building, a coil winding tighter around my chest. One night, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the silence of the swamp, a sound of pure terror and pain before it was suddenly, sickeningly cut off. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I was standing on my back porch around 1 a.m. The air was thick and absolutely still. The whistling started up again from the swamp, closer this time, almost right on my property line. It was that same mesmerizing, chilling tune. My curiosity, against all common sense, was winning. I took a step toward the tall grass. Then my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, breathing heavy. A woman's voice, rough and urgent, cut through the line. "Don't look. Don't look," she hissed. "Do you hear that whistling? Ignore it. You hear it again, you bolt the door and stuff your ears. He'll think your curiosity is an invitation to him. Now hang up, hang up." The line went dead. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The whistling stopped instantly, replaced by a low, humming silence that felt infinitely worse. The next day, I asked the only house near me if they knew anything. An older couple answered, utterly confused. They told me they had been out of town for a week, visiting family. After that, the house became a problem. I'd catch shadows walking across the walls in the corner of my eye every time. It was the Hat Man, I knew it. Things started missing only to show up days later in the most bizarre places: my car keys under a pile of folded laundry, my wallet in the microwave. I'd tell myself it was just exhaustion, the grind of the night shift getting to me. I was tired, always tired. Then came the night that broke me. I was working in the old cavernous storage section of the port, an area where the lights always flickered and the air was cold. I was logging a new shipment of machinery, utterly alone. Suddenly, that feeling, that prickling, intense certainty that someone was watching me came on like a sudden fever. In the corner of my eye, I saw it. Larry. He was peeking at me from behind a towering stack of wooden crates. Just the side of his face, his eyes wide open and staring, fixed on me with an unsettling, blank intensity. My heart dropped to my stomach. A wave of ice-cold dread hit me. He looked wrong, his face pale and drawn. I watched, paralyzed, as Larry's head slowly, deliberately pulled back behind the crate. "Oh, what's up, Larry?" "Thought you went home already," I called out, my voice shaking a little. I walked quickly around the corner of the crates, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc. He was gone. The walkway was long and straight. There was no other way out. And then, at the far end of the walkway, I saw it. The Hat Man. The tall, dark shadow, its brimmed hat unmistakable, walking swiftly and disappearing behind the very last stack of crates. I stumbled back, hyperventilating, and ran toward the nearest group of workers. "I just saw Larry." He was behind a stack of crates. "Did you see him go out?" I asked, breathless. They stopped what they were doing and exchanged confused, worried looks. They looked at each other, then back at me. "Mikey, I don't know what you're talking about," one of them, a big guy named Dan, finally said, his voice hesitant. He swallowed hard. Larry's been dead for a couple of months now." My blood ran cold. "He died in an accident right here on the job under mysterious circumstances," another guy added, looking everywhere but at me. Dan stepped forward, his eyes full of pity. "The job posting you answered." "You were hired to replace Larry. A couple of days later, I handed in my 2-week notice. I didn't even stay the 2 weeks. I just packed my bags and left the keys on the counter of that little house. I told my boss I couldn't take it anymore. I always felt like I was being watched, and the nights were killing me. But the truth is, I knew the Hat Man had seen me. I knew the ghost of the man I called my friend was just a terrified spirit, and the Hat Man was something worse, something that used the dead to lure the living. And I knew the whistle was for me. I was afraid that the curiosity I'd shown when I reached for that door was the invitation it had been waiting for,